This is Unstructured.
Today we're joined by Ginny Radcliffe, who has the awesome title of the People Hacker. How are you doing today, Ginny?
I'm great, Eric. Thank you. How are you?
I'm fantastic, and I'm really excited to have you on because I interview a wide variety of people, and I do have a special interest in influence with the side of crime. I've had FBI agents on, behavioral engineers, Robert Cialdini's personally trained students, people like that. And I kind of feel like all of this information, everything from marketing all the way to occult, are all part of a spectrum.
Right.
And what you do, I feel, is the full package. You have to use every one of these techniques, from influence to body language to full-blown manipulation, to achieve your task, which is to break into corporate networks, buildings, etc. Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, sure. I mean, that's essentially the job, although I always point out at this stage, I am hired to do so.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, we're hired to use all of those things to do the same thing as a technical hacker, except I only work with people and psychology. So hence People Hacker. Yeah, for sure.
Which is actually far more effective. I work in IT, and I can tell you, people are the weak link.
Right.
I don't know if you've heard. Go on.
Well, they're a weak link, right? Potentially a weak link, because as you know, we're all subject to flaws and errors and emotions and things because we're human. Right. I think this weakest link thing, if we train people properly and teach them to what to look out for, we can somewhat reduce the potential damage. But yes, I mean, certainly a lot of the time when I'm booked to talk or to train, it's because people think that they're the weakest link in an organization, and therefore that's what needs testing and reinforced. Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's quite often easier to sneak into the building off of somebody else's employee ID than it is to, crack into the firewall sometimes from the outside.
Yeah, because I mean, the tech, is always improving. It does a pretty good job, and certainly detection, even if it can't prevent a hack or a breach, there's certainly it's difficult to do that without a digital footprint, right? But we can certainly usually find a way of getting into a building, and it'll be facilitated by the humans,
Exactly. And do you take advantage of it? I imagine one of the biggest tools is people don't like confrontation.
Sure. It depends on the culture a little bit.
Oh, good point.
Right. So culturally, the British typically won't like too much of a confrontation. But if we go into the Mediterranean, into places like Italy and Spain, that they might be more willing to have a confrontation. And it's gender-based as well. So one of the things I always get asked is, and maybe you were going to ask me, and I don't want to preempt questions, but
no, go ahead.
Does it help that you're a woman? And the thing is that presupposes that the security team are men. But in fact, if it's a female security guard, they would be less worried about having a confrontation, right? They'd be more suspicious. So it kind of depends, as everything does, to a certain extent, the context, and then within that context, the individual as well. So, we share human tendencies, which I'm sure we're going to get into, but it's the individual as well, for sure. So it just depends a little bit.
Well, what I find so fascinating, and I'm guessing you have discovered this too, is that we can fall for things even if we know it's happening to us.
Right.
Because we're so wired a certain way. We're all wet work. And even though we know that something is going on, we're still kind of falling for it.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, one of the things that is so true, is the way emotions affect us, for example. So we can talk to people about when you're being scammed or conned. So in security, we would call it over the phone phishing, but people might see an email as well. So this is someone who has malicious intent, looking to get someone to respond in a certain way, to let them in or give information. Well, one of the key tricks is to raise the emotional temperature. So to get someone frightened or angry or even happy, right? And in the case of romance scams, this lovely, attractive person thinks I'm amazing. And the reason that that scammers do that, I say we do that, but scammers do that, is because when our emotions are raised, our logic drops. And so we stop making good decisions. Now, the problem with that is we can train people in awareness training and in presentations and all those types of things to look out for that and to say, when you feel angry, when something looks too good to be true, remember that your decision-making capacity has just plummeted and you might make bad choices. Well, we can tell them that. But the problem is that when we're in that emotional state, we tend to forget good advice because it takes over. So I always say emotion kicks logic off the cliff. And
True.
this is the problem, is that we might remember general scams. We might think, a lot of people think, oh, well, I would spot a phishing email because this is an email that's spelt badly or asks me for money or, is just silly in some way. No one's going to fall for it. But what they forget is what I would do would be a more tailored attack that would look exactly at that person and what makes that particular person drop some defenses. And then it's hard to recognize it. And so people will still fall for it, for sure.
And I imagine you would bother to take the time to study the person, like, their bank account is at this bank. You can actually make sure that, okay, I'm going to pretend I'm from that bank and things of that sort.
Well, the thing is, Eric, you're right. But it used to be that, so I started this way many, many years ago because I started out when I was very small, and it used to be that we had to do things in a certain way, surveillance and that type of thing. But now we do study people, but it's made so much quicker by the amount of information people put out there about themselves. For example, when you're talking about a bank, if you want to know which bank someone in an organization is with, and we look at the employees of that organization on, say, something like LinkedIn, and then if you just follow their social media postings, what we actually had an incident like this not long ago where we wanted to get in touch with some employees from an organization to get some information. Okay, so we're gathering intelligence to decide how we were going to approach. And I found this lady, and she worked in human resources, and what she was posting for quite a long time on Twitter was how annoyed she was with her bank, right? So she's got on Twitter, hey at, whatever bank it was, this is terrible customer service. I've been a customer for 25 years and, you haven't done X, Y, Z. And so, of course, now, I just need to wait a little bit of time. And then I know her bank. I know she's been a customer for an amount of time and I know she's not happy. So if I need to call and pretend to be from that bank, all right, I already have the information. I don't even have to try very hard to find it. I don't need to be skilled. I just need to be nosy. And that's the, and that's the problem. People don't that's the disconnect. People don't understand when they post these identifiers what someone with malicious intent can do with them. And I mean, it's a real issue.
Yeah, she had to be so easy. You could always call her and say, I was reading what you said about us on Twitter, and I've been assigned to personally handle your case.
Sure. It's like, hey, Margaret, I'm calling you from the Bank of Disneyland, and I've been assigned to make sure that you continue to be a happy customer. Now, I know we've let you down, but we are going to make this right. If you'll just bear with me, I'm so sorry you've had these problems. If you just bear with me, I'm going to take you through some identifiers. And what we're going to do is we're going to put this right as soon as possible.
Yeah. Can you confirm your address now? Okay. And the account would be, okay. Now, the date of that transaction was there. Now, was this your checking or savings?
Exactly, right. You'd be great, Eric. That's perfect.
Thank you.
Right. And if you can give people a few personal identifiers, like you said about the address, right, to confirm the address. Mm-hmm. So if I was to ask someone, so if you can just confirm that address, some people would be suspicious, right? Because I'm the bank, I should know the address. But I can usually, unless you opt out, and this is as true in the States, varies a little bit state to state, but it's true in most countries. For a very small amount of money, anyone can access the database of what we call in the UK the electoral roll, so the registered voters. Unless you opt out of that, that's public information. So I could say, just confirming your address is still with the zip code ending 5YZ. And now I'm even more believable.
Right. And we've also been trained, because I don't know if you've run into this, but every time I've contacted customer service lately, it seems, I give my address and then the rep comes on and says, "Can I confirm your address?"
Yes.
So the repetition of, oh, this is normal procedure because it's always happening, means that we're primed. The world has primed us for that.
Yeah. And our brains are lazy and we are preoccupied and busy, and we want to be led to a certain extent if it means the least possible trouble and hassle. We can get off the phone, we can finish that transaction, we can make a problem go away. Then that's what people want, right? So a good hacker will introduce confusion, introduce a problem, introduce emotion, and then give the person an easy route out. And that's, the essence of influence, really.
Now, I heard you on another podcast or video, Mike Winnett, and I was very impressed. I loved how you were talking about what I affectionately, this is a term from Christopher Lockhead, but we call them hustle porn stars.
Exactly, right? That's a great term.
And so I love what he was doing. I love how you were describing all of that. And I wanted to go into that. But in that interview, you did talk about, and you mentioned it here, starting this as a child.
Yes.
Let's go into that a little bit, because I'm like, well, wait, what?
We'll unpack that, shall we? So, So I always get asked how I ended up doing what I do and how long I've been in the business. And even though I feel quite old, I'm not that old. But when I say to someone it's about 35 years, I need to explain. So here's the thing. I grew up in part of the UK in a city that a lot of people might know called Liverpool, right? So the Beatles and the soccer for people in the States.
Thank you.
At the time, I just get, whenever your hometown is mentioned and you always sort of say, oh, you know the one. And at the time, Liverpool's an amazing city, but we did suffer a lot in sort of the 70s and 80s with poverty and crime and stuff like that before we got European investment, which will probably disappear soon because of Brexit. But anyway, and so the city was pretty run down, and I had a large family and I had lots of cousins who used to look after me. So half my family are law enforcement and military, the other half, not really quite so much. And
two sides of the same coin.
Yes. And so just like, most kids do, you hang out with your friends in the neighborhood, and there was an empty house. Basically, several of them, because the city was quite run down. And we used to go and play in these empty houses in the school vacation. And then we'd say, oh, well, we got in during the day, let's get in at night. And, because it might be haunted. And you're tiny. I was a really little kid. I would have been 7 or 8 when we started sort of running around and doing this. And lots of people do that when they're younger. But then we kept going and said, well, okay, let's do somewhere that isn't empty. So let's, for example, we got into, there's lots of museums in my city, and there was a museum, and we decided it would be great fun to get into this museum and try and get locked in overnight.
What did you do? Hide in the ceiling tiles?
So, well, we just, you see, and this is these days there's security cameras and alarms. But back then there was like one, security guy reading the newspaper,
right,
falling asleep, walking around every hour. We just avoided him. I mean, that's the truth. We just avoided him. We ran into the toilets. We just changed floors. We used the stairs. The guy was using the lift. And we just got locked in overnight. And it's terrifying. I can tell you now, they made a movie about Night at the Museum. Right. And I remember when I saw that came out, and I thought, for a minute, oh my God, they've taken my story. And is this going to be like some, cautionary tale about child crime? But actually, it is terrifying to be locked in a museum at night. And we were locked in, and there was a large, a whole floor dedicated to ancient Egypt with mummies, and terrifying. But I never although we did lots of things like that, and it was always very frightening. But it never stopped me doing it. And there was just another story that was very early on. I think the first one I remember was a zoo. We got into a zoo at night, and I wanted to look at a lion and see a lion at night, and it kind of threw itself against the cage, and and we all went screaming out of the zoo, and there was no security. And then another time this is awful and disrespectful, but we were just kids, in my defense. There was a funeral parlor. And teenagers have this morbid fascination with death and things, and let's go and see a body. And we got locked in there as well. And that was actually awful and terrifying. And the body was not in the refrigerator. I mean, it was just there.
Oh. Yeah.
And then we turned, we screamed and everything, and turned around to bash the door, and the door was locked. And we were there all night with the dead body. It was awful. But I always say,
touch of karma.
Yes, but it just doesn't put me off, And what happens was, I carried on, and we never stole anything or broke anything. That really wasn't the point. The point was the same as it is for a lot of hackers. It's just that.
I was thinking that.
Well, I mean, it's there, right?
Can I get in? I'm not going to do anything. I just want to see if I can look.
And particularly if people say you can't, or this is this is too secure. And so I had cousins and older kids sort of teaching me tricks, and we carried on doing it for a long time. And I started to learn the skills that I use now. So even though I had my bachelor's degree was unrelated, and then I got a master's degree, a business degree, alongside all of those things, I was interested in things like influence and persuasion and negotiation and body language and deception work.
Who are some of your influences in that, if you don't mind?
So I was always interested in terms of body language and deception. And of course, in the trade, we would never say body language, right? Non-verbals. I studied Dr. Paul Ekman's work, who people may be familiar with from the show Lie to Me is really, but also David Matsumoto over in Japan. And some of the, I think Mark Frank as well, who was one of Ekman's sort of proteges and then carried on the field himself. So I studied deception and with Ekman initially, and then sort of branched out to other sources. And then, all of these things that I was studying, every time I kind of learned something new, I'd use it to take away from me kind of physically breaking in by picking a lock or climbing up onto a roof or something, and use it to talk to people instead, and to kind of create rapport so that they'd let me in, right, which seemed a safer and easier option. And I mean, and yeah, and that's how it all started. And I always, even when I was doing my degree and when I was working, I got a proper job, if you like. You know, I was a consultant and I was in procurement. I always used to get these jobs on the side. You know, well, will you test this building, see if you can get into this building, or see if you can do this. And it all sort of culminated. So I was building this sort of umbrella skills. And I was teaching, I was a negotiation consultant, and I still do that. And I was teaching all these things. I actually spoke at a conference in Germany, and I was approached at the end of the conference in a very clandestine way, you know. So, you know, I was going into my hotel. It was quite late after this conference, and I've been speaking about negotiation and linguistics, right, and the kind of patterns in linguistics to detect stress and things like, you know, in a pattern of conversation, whether there was someone other people were deferring to. And someone sort of hissed at me out the dark, you know, Jenny Radcliffe. It's like, God, you know, what? And so, yeah, man, I didn't know. In Germany, so not my home country even. And he said, you know, you're a social engineer. And I was like, okay, weirdo, I'm going to run away. But I said, yes, I suppose. And they offered me a job. And it was like, it wasn't that I hadn't been paid before, but it was an especially big salary that they offered me. And it was to break into a bank in Germany, like 2 days later. And so initially I said no, Eric, because I have to be quite a moral person. The psychology and the skills that I have, that in the wrong hands is very manipulative and criminal. Sure. So, but also I didn't know these people were. They could have been real criminals, right? And so it was very, it was kind of like I said no. And then he said, we're going to pay you. And he named a figure that was just the most I would ever have been paid in my life for one job. So I said, yes, where would you want me to be? No. I mean, I checked them out a little bit first, but I mean, it was a security firm. They had been hired to do it. There were contracts. And what happened was, well, I mean, I turned up to the building and I had an arm wrapped in a bandage. And I mean, I spoke about this before, but there was biotech. So there was a fingerprint recognition entry lock. And I'd bandaged my right hand, and I was carrying a lot of files in my left hand. And I get into the bank, and it's a very extravagant, very expensive, exclusive kind of place. And there's a security guard. And I walked straight up to the biotech, straight up to the fingerprint entry, as if I did it every day. And this is one of the things that's really important. It's not really acting, but it's confidence, right? You have to believe yourself that you're capable of it.
You have to belong.
Yeah, sure. And there's lots that, and you know, I don't even speak German, so. But like, and I put my finger on the lock and it doesn't let me in. And I try again and it doesn't let me in. And I swore quite loudly and dropped all the files and created this fuss. And of course, the security guard doesn't want that in his reception. And this is the key. The absolute key to it is I don't look dangerous. Right? I just look like a normal person, a colleague. And he let me in. And of course, he shouldn't have let me in, because the minute that I get past, I take the bandage off, I dump the files. And I was in the office of, you know, all of the managers. I took files, I got passwords, we put keyloggers into.
Oh, nice. Thumb drives, had some fun.
And, you know, and I was in and out probably in 90 minutes. And that bank, if I'd been a criminal, were really compromised, you know. So it's, yeah, my mum thinks I work with computers.
Well, after a fashion.
Sort of. Yeah. So
what I really especially appreciate about that is it was one mistake. that let you in.
Yeah.
Only takes one slip.
Yeah. It's just, and I've been doing it obviously now for years and years. I mean, but the reason that Germany was significant was after I did that, I came out in public and said, this is what I do for a living. And, when I look, I'd given interviews about negotiation and about influence tactics and all sorts of things long before I came out and said, this is what I did as a job, because it really has only been acceptable to say that you're a burglar for hire
right.
in the last few years, right? Because of the security industry.
True. And I don't know if you're familiar with Kevin Mitnick.
Yes, of course.
Okay. Well, I feel like his example is like the perfect proof of the social engineering versus the computer engineering, because as you read through, he hacked people.
Yeah.
He was always doing it.
Time. He said there is no patch for human stupidity. That's what he said.
It's true.
And, that's a bit mean. It's mean because anyone with the right script can be caught out, including Kevin Mitnick. And he probably would not say any different.
That's true. I actually have had Chase Hughes on. He's another behavioral engineer. And his favorite, shall we say, counterparts, he ran a lot of prisons and things like that. He loves cocky people. They're the easiest for him.
Oh, my God. So I'll tell you, right, I was in the States and I was speaking at a conference. Absolutely gorgeous. I was in California. I was in Santa Barbara. And it wasn't someone at the conference, right? But it was a real swanky event, and I was actually, it was during the Soccer World Cup, and England had just been knocked out, and I was really unhappy, and I was at the bar kind of not wanting to do anything. And this guy had seen my picture, and that was there because I was going to do this talk. And he said, you're a hacker. Now, kind of like I am, but most people, when they think of a hacker, don't think of someone like me. They think of a white male, usually in a hoodie, usually behind a keyboard
with a bottle of Mountain Dew, and
and no friends, right? That's what people think, and it's a cliche, but that's what people think. So I kind of said yes. I said, and he said, oh well, I work for a gigantic electronic company that we've all would know. And I said, well, actually, I'm not really a hacker. I'm a social engineer. And he said, oh, we love you guys. We are ready for you. You just try.
Oh.
And the thing is, number one, I'm not hacking you unless you pay me, right? It's not a hobby. It takes time and effort. And number two, it's such a stupid thing to say because you're kind of painting a target on yourself.
Sure.
It's like saying, I dare you to.
Right.
So Chase is right. Arrogance is, it's like in a negotiation as well when people say, I'm a Rottweiler.
Right.
And we get, well, that's actually quite easy to deal with. The more one-dimensional and dominant a single trait is, the easier that is to counter.
Mm-hmm. You see, he said that people that give him the most trouble have a lot of humility. They're not sure of themselves. And he has a nightmare of a time with them because it's hard to get them to commit on one thing or another. And that's trickier to manipulate.
Yeah, he has a good point. Because what you're looking for, if someone's very indecisive and dithers a little bit, you really have to push a bit harder to get them to do what you want. And that means you're on the phone or in contact longer, and there's more chance of, of your pretext or your, the deception coming unraveled.
He actually had a couple of questions for you himself. I tend to have previous guests, and I love talking about other guests and introducing them, but he wanted to know if you've ever used a wheelchair in a social engineering engagement.
I personally haven't. I have a friend who's a very good social engineer who is a double amputee. And I have a podcast as well. He came on in the very early days, and he said to me, he has never stopped, ever. Right?
I
And he's an
believe it.
extremely good technical hacker. But he says in hotels, he said, I can go anywhere I like. So I can just say, I need the bathroom. Someone take me now. And he says, and they'll just leave him because obviously nobody wants to offend him. So
Right.
I haven't. The nearest I suppose to anything like that was when I was pregnant. I worked almost to the last minute because I was so busy, because nobody stops a pregnant lady.
I can imagine. Nice. I thought of your bandaged arm earlier too, and I was like, oh, Ted Bundy's old trick.
Yes, now you say it. Yes, and then he bundled them in the back of the van. That's true. I've never thought of that before, but that's true. He did. Oh my God.
Yeah, it's disturbing. And that's when I said everything's on a spectrum. So you go from Zig Ziglar all the way to Jim Jones. It's all in there. It could be useful or it could be evil.
Well, you play on people's weaknesses, and if you think about it, you're looking at your target, and you're looking at what will work to drop the defenses of a target.
Right.
So for me, when I bandaged my arm, it really wasn't about the bandage. It was that I didn't want someone to help me, but I wanted something that would facilitate a fuss, right? Big, loud, a commotion, if you will, in a building that I knew would hate that because it was very refined and very rich clientele, and it was very sort of quiet. And I knew that from surveillance and some research. Now, in the case of Bundy, he's looking at enlisting, he's looking at kidnapping women, right? And so what he played on with two things, and one of them, obviously Cialdini. One of them is, this is a person who is likable, he's attractive. And now he needs help, so we're going to play for empathy and sympathy as well. And these are the things that we work on in scams and cons and hustles all the time. What are the human characteristics, and what are the atmospherics, the environmental conditions? And that is the thing that colors the scam, right?
Sure.
So, but when a lot of the time when I hear people talking about social engineering, they'll talk about tailgating. You mentioned it before. So I'm just going to follow someone in and hope they hold the gate open for me. And then either I have a dummy card or I have no card to let me into the office or whatever. But for me, that is a less elegant attack.
Right.
What you should be doing is taking the cultural temperature of that target, doing your research and knowing which characteristics to exploit to make sure you're successful. And that's why, I guess, now you raise it, that's why Bundy was so clever, because he used two influence principles, really.
Sure.
Likability and sympathy, empathy/sympathy, right?
And he also reduced his threat. He wasn't as threatening. He was injured.
Well, this is true, and this is what I was saying before. The problem is people expect a criminal to behave like a criminal, right? To look and sound threatening.
Exactly.
And one of the reasons I've been so successful in my job is that I don't. So people underestimate, a chubby little woman, and they probably shouldn't.
There's a book by Malcolm Gladwell just came out last week, Talking to Strangers. I really recommend you check it out.
Okay.
And this topic here is a big part of it. He was talking about how, one, we suck at detecting lies because we have expectations, and first off, he said most people default to truth.
Well, that's
a
necessary.
weakness.
Well,
yeah,
it's
to survive
necessary,
as a species.
because otherwise we'd be paranoid.
Right, and nobody could ever get anywhere or get along or anything like that, and you'd be miserable to be around.
Yeah, or you'd work in security.
Well, I imagine that you have that mindset. It's kind of hard to turn off. You know, every time you talk to a waiter, okay, yeah, they're doing this. Or anywhere you go, you've seen the sausage be made.
Mm-hmm.
And that really, I'm sure, isn't very fun.
So the thing with deception work, and with a lot of these things, but particularly with deception work and as you know, facial expressions and things, is on the one hand, once you learn those techniques and use them, you know, you've got to practice, right? Because if you don't,
Sure.
it sort of goes. But once you learn to observe people carefully, and once you learn to be sort of more vigilant in your surroundings, you can't unsee those things.
Right.
Right. So, like, you know, the micro expression for disgust is a wrinkled nose and the top lip pulls back. Right.
It's also contempt, isn't it?
Contempt is
Similar.
Contempt is well, you see, this is where I get to be a geek.
Good.
Actually,
I love it.
Actually, contempt is completely different. So
okay.
contempt. So, okay, if you think of a food that you don't like, right? So I hate canned tuna fish. If I see canned tuna fish, I sort of make the noise, eh, right? So your tongue goes out a little bit, your top lip comes up, and your nose wrinkles, right?
Yeah, gotcha.
And that is, so disgust is pretty much at anything that we find repulsive, all right? Like usually an object that we find to be distasteful, something we wouldn't like the smell of.
And it's hard to hide.
It's all of them pretty much are hard to hide, right? It's just that micro expressions are very quick. So you've got to learn to catch them. But disgust is one that when I'm training people to see microfacial expressions, that's one of the easiest ones to see because it's fairly pronounced, right? That little nose wrinkle. But contempt is the only facial expression, the only micro expression that only happens on one side of the face. And what happens with contempt is we sort of look down our nose and we activate the buccinator muscle, which is on the side, is in your cheek. So it's the muscle in your cheek that gives you a dimple. So if you can imagine, I always say to people, this is the expression that my mother-in-law has when she finds out that I'm going away on business again for 10 days, you know, and I'm not there to cook dinner every night for my family. It's like, well, you know, it's that, and it's always directed at a person, or pretty much always. So yeah, those are those two.
I remember, I guess contempt popped in my mind because they've done studies on it that micro expression between couples is like a 99.9% guarantee that they will be divorced. Yeah.
I forget just off the top of my head, I forget whose work that was, but yes, because obviously if you think, because what contempt is a feeling of superiority over another person. So obviously if you feel massively superior to your spouse, then that's not going to be great for your relationship.
Definitely not. Now, what was it? Chase had a couple more questions for you. I don't know if you have these ones, but he was wondering, what is one trick that, shall we say, the audience can use to negotiate better deals with companies? Or do you deal with that kind of thing?
So we train, I don't shout about this very much because I just don't, right? Because the security work's more popular and whatever. But I train and have for years trained corporations and agencies, if you like, at all levels of negotiation. My focus is psychology. So so we call it the dark arts, right? The Jedi mind trick course. So we do it all the time. And actually I did 3 days of this week in London. And I suppose, you know, people always want, I guess, a silver bullet here.
Right.
And there are some. actually. But one of the things I'd say, well, there's two. I can give you. I mean, do you want the real dark stuff, or do you just want a tip?
Let's have it all. I'm greedy.
Let's have it all. All right. So perhaps the most obvious point, and I highly recommend a book by Professor Stuart Diamond on this. It's called Getting More. Okay, is you have to see the picture in the other person's head, right? Mm-hmm. So when we negotiate, what we do is you don't have to sympathize, but you have to empathize with what the other person is seeing coming at them, right? Mm-hmm. So in other words, it's understanding where they're coming from. And what I always say is, to change someone's mind, you have to be somewhat in it. Mm. So what you have to do is say, if I was them, what do I see? Like, what is this situation like? So we start from there. And then what we say would be, what is that person? I mean, this is dark, and I'm not going to give you too much in it, but everyone is motivated because it really is. But everyone is motivated towards positive things and negative things.
Sure.
And the negative, as you would know from psychology books and everything that you know, the negative's far stronger than the positive.
Yes, loss aversion is probably the number one tool to keep people hooked. For
sure, right? So we fear the loss of something we value more than we are drawn to the potential gain of something of value, right?
True.
So what you do is you have to tune in to what that person really fears. And that is why it's dark. Like, what is the last thing that person would give away? What would they hold on to? What makes that person? How do they define themselves? You know, they can't sleep tonight. It's 2 a.m. They're staring at the ceiling. What is the thing that they cling on to? What is the thing that they worry about? And when we find out what that is, we link their behavior to that. And that will make someone change their mind. It is pretty evil.
But the thing is that we always do it. I mean, it's done everywhere around you. How many times are they? Everything is worded in a manner that it's almost gone. I don't know if you've noticed. I love doing this when I see an ad for something and I go to the site and they say 17 left. I love refreshing the page and seeing 24, 62, 10.
You know, what they've done is they've gone to YouTube and they've put in Cialdini and they've pressed a video that's 5 minutes long.
Yes.
And gone, oh, scarcity, that works. Right?
Exactly.
So, people sometimes know it. People sometimes do it subconsciously. But what I'm talking about is the very deliberate sort of dissection of someone's psychology. So I can illustrate what I just said with an example. Okay?
That'd be awesome.
So I have a couple of years ago, I had clients who they worked for universities in the UK, and there are very particular procedures around procurement. I'm sure there are in the States, but there's paperwork and there has to be a tender process, right? 3 or 4 quotes and all this.
Sure.
And their main problem was that academics didn't obey the process. So they were people with power within the university, so they had referent power, they had positional power, and they were going around the process. And those executives at the unis, this is a big problem for them, because then the deal would be done with a supplier, say, and they'd have to go and negotiate when the supplier already knew that they had the contract because they'd spoken to the academic, right? So due process not followed. So what I said to them was, how do we get to the academics, right? And I do apologize to any academics listening. So what does an academic want? Oh, recognition, research to be published, Okay.
Tenure.
10, which leads tenure to a certain extent, right? And to the demand, right? So, but mostly they want that research, their life's work, right? Their focus to be published. They don't care necessarily whether the research question is right or wrong, but they do want the credit for the research and be able to put their research out there. So I said, okay, what gets in the way of that, right? Well, there are certain deadlines, number one, to publish research for different universities. And number two, there's always another guy working on the same research, right? So what they really don't want is, this professor in Liverpool doesn't want another professor in New York to get there first and kind of gazump that research, right?
Right.
So now we have what they desire and what they fear. So I say, and I don't tell them they have to come up with it, but I say, so now, how do you persuade an academic? What is your biggest stick? And of course, the biggest stick is time, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you don't do things the way we want them to do, if you don't follow due process, then we will, things will be delayed and your research will be late to be published.
Oh, nice.
Whereas, and remember, this one is a lot less, we can help you get things done quickly if you follow a few rules.
Right.
So the stick is far bigger than the carrot, but the stick is the thing that they emphasize. And of course, could that get in the way? Well, yes, it can.
Nice. Nicely done.
Thank you. And suddenly we had compliant academics. And I mean, not across the board, because not everyone is exactly the same and situations change. But it's the premise that we're talking about, right? It's the idea of understanding someone acutely and then understanding how we can use that to change their behavior. It's never about you as the negotiator. It's about the other person as a human being, as an individual on the other side of the table. And that can be very, very powerful, but also quite manipulative in the wrong hands. And I've just told everyone who listens to this how to do it.
Good show.
Hey, rock and roll.
Well, and the thing is that some of the I think we already intuit and know. I mean, we learn to manipulate as a child to get a toy, to get food, to get whatever.
We do. But you know what my problem with that is, right? This is true. And you're right. But people get lazy.
Well, no, that's true. Yes. That's like.
So do you know the movie Gone in 60 Seconds?
Yes, it's not a stellar movie, but yeah.
So Nicolas Cage, Angelina Jolie, and
yep.
So they're car thieves and they're stealing cars. And there's this point where one of these car thieves is stealing a car, and this kid comes up to him, puts a gun to the window of the car, and says, give me the car. And the guy sort of can't believe it. He punches him, and he looks at this kid. He punches him, and he says, "You kids need better role models." That's a lazy way of stealing a car.
Right.
And that is always my problem with, yes, we learn how to do some level of manipulation just as human beings, as children. But what people don't do, and the reason that, we can teach negotiation and influence, is because we kind of get lazy and think it's easy. And
Sure.
It actually isn't easy. It's not easy to switch perspectives. It's not easy to listen to language and to watch someone all the time. And I think your question was, do I ever switch it off with waiters and we got onto sort of micro expressions and things. But
right.
The truth is, once you see that disgust expression, once you notice the little dimple in the cheek that may mean contempt, we've got to be very careful because context is everything. Okay.
Sure.
Once we see that, once you learn to do it, you're right. It's very difficult to switch it off and to unsee it. And it's a huge, however, you couldn't possibly be that focused all the time, So whilst I
Sure.
always see it, to switch something on and be that focused is exhausting, and it's very particular kind of frame of mind. Sometimes it clicks in if I see a potential safety or security issue, or if someone's just, if kind of like my spidey sense kicks off, and I think, okay, I'm going to focus on this more. But the majority of the time, I might notice things, but I would dismiss it because I'm human too, and I've got to focus on getting through my day. And if I honestly analysed everyone I saw, I would never get anything done, So it's both.
Well, and I'm guessing too that a lot of it is like, okay, so they're doing that, but who cares? It doesn't really matter to you that much, or doesn't affect you directly, or that contempt, maybe it was for the kitchen and not necessarily you.
Exactly. Or the disgust might not be my lasagna I've just served everyone. It might be they're thinking about something else. And let's hope so, because I'm cooking again tomorrow, right?
Exactly.
But yeah, for sure.
So do you do that in a way, almost turn on a little bit of a willful ignorance? Unless something screams at you, you just kind of like, yeah, whatever. Well,
yes. And I mean to a massive extent, yes. And but if I'm grumpy, and this is just a terrible confession to make, but if I'm grumpy or I'm in a bad mood, then I might switch it on a little bit more and be a little bit more aware. So for example, we were on vacation this year, and really one of our neighbours decided to pick a fight about, of all things, a car parking space, right? So we're in a tiny little place on the coast, on the south coast of England. There's almost no parking spaces, and yet we pay for this extra for this space outside the place where we stayed, a little cottage we stayed. And they wanted the space, right? And I'm not really gonna, because of the job and because of a million things, it's not that I'm easygoing, because I'm really not, but I don't pick fights very, very easily, right? And we were happy to kind of come to a partway solution.
Right.
But this lady, she just wouldn't let it go, and she was pushing and pushing. And I just, instead of just sort of arguing like a regular person, I argued and switched all the skills on. So what I said was far more cutting, and that's a bad thing to do. But basically,
you caused psychic damage to her.
So she'd left a letter. She wrote us a letter explaining all the reasons why they wanted this car parking space, which, remember, I'm not that wedded to, but we did pay for.
Right.
But when I look at that linguistically and everything that says within that, I knew what type of person she was. And of course, when she wouldn't stop arguing with me, I basically said, let's call her, what name should we call her? You suggest one, Eric. Just to give her
Betty.
a name. Pardon?
Betty.
So, Betty, and, bear in mind, this is without me looking her up, right? So I could do some open source intelligence. I could find out where she worked. I could find out a million things about it. And I really don't, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like, Betty, I know that you prefer to write to people rather than confront them. And I think that in the past, people probably point that out to you and say that there's a passive aggressive nature to the things that you do, that you refer to authority and yet never take responsibility for the damage your opinions cause. Am I right, Betty? And of course, Betty, I am exactly right. And now Betty is really perturbed. And so, Betty, there's lots of ways that you could have persuaded us to help you. We were prepared to help you. But instead, you went for the lowest and on it goes. And in the end, she screamed at me, "You don't know me. How do you know me?" And ran away. And because there are all these indicators within what people do, within what they write, the way they act, the way they relate to other people. And none of us are perfect and behave well, right? Because that's not me behaving well either. But when someone can see it and takes the trouble to really analyze it, it will demolish a person if it's done properly. And And you know, I'm not going to demolish Betty, but I'm going to make Betty back off and give me my car park space back.
She'll suffer a little.
She's probably still upset. She probably is, right? But I mean, I really tried everything to stop it getting to that. But people don't let things go, you know.
Wow. So to wrap things up, what one thing would you recommend that people do to secure themselves from, be it manipulation or anything else?
It really needs to be two things.
Okay.
If that's okay. Well, I could give you more than two, but let's say.
Of course, okay.
First most important thing is their online behavior. So these days, we're all using social media. Mm-hmm. Even if you personally don't have accounts on platforms like Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, family and friends will, right? But let's assume that we have our own accounts. Mm-hmm. First thing is, you've got to make them more private, right? Using your full name, pictures of your children, pictures of your hobbies, checking in when we eat every burger that we ever eat. All of those things can be used to build a profile that social engineers will use against you. So the first thing is, privacy settings should be whatever you're comfortable with, right? I'm a great believer in not telling someone what level of information they share, but making sure that it's a conscious choice. Okay. Mm-hmm. So for example, Facebook, friends and friends of friends only, maybe to see your posts rather than anyone who's got access to the net is an example. Okay. And Facebook, to their credit, and people don't credit Facebook a lot, they do make it easier to do that these days. All right. So be careful what you post. For God's sake, and you know, honestly, I shouldn't say that, but you don't reuse passwords. Mm-hmm. Use a strong password unique to every site. And if people say, oh my goodness, you know, that's going to take me forever.
The browser's built it in now. It's really handy.
Hopefully.
We're generating like a one. I don't know. I will say I use randomly generated passwords for every site I do.
But most people don't, Eric, honestly. They don't. They reuse it and it's always out there. So if one account is hacked, everyone is hacked. So take your top 3 most used online sites. So for a lot of people, that might be a shopping site, a social media site, and the bank, for example. Right. And make sure you don't reuse those passwords. Now, that's basic cybersecurity with a little bit of protecting your identity and information. But in terms of scammers, social engineers, and con artists, this is what happens in almost every scam. And that's whether you meet someone face to face, even in, you know, the whole world of deep fakes, and, you know, this video of me speaking could not be, you know, might not be me. Right. What you need to remember is the minute someone asks for money or asks you to take action, click on a link, you know, change the platform, download an attachment, tell me about money. It should just be this massive red flag that might not be a credible person at the end of the phone. That might be someone who's trying to con you. So when they mention money, when they ask you to do something, that is the point when what people should do is step back, don't do anything, step back, maybe talk to someone and say, do you think this sounds legitimate? Mm. But the minute that we step away from it and take some time, that emotional red mist starts to go away. We become a little bit more rational, and then we make a decision. That is the thing that every con artist and scammer relies on people taking the action that they ask them to take. And if people just stopped and thought about it, I think we'd be much safer and more secure as a species.
Awesome. I was actually thinking that, a pause for everything.
Yeah, because we act so fast, and in fear we act fast. You know, if someone says, you know, you get an email, Eric, you know, you were speeding, and if you pay this ticket straight away, it's only half the fine.
Right.
And you think, God, when was I? Maybe I was speeding. And if they're good, they might say, well, we know, this guy said this is where he works and this is his address. So we're going to say he was speeding down, the most likely freeway on a Tuesday morning, round about the time he'd be leaving for work. And it sounds very plausible.
Right.
And you really need to just step back and say, this could be fraudulent. And then what we say to people is externally verify. So, if they say they're the bank, don't answer the email, don't continue the conversation on the phone, step away and call the number that you found from the back of the bank statement or from the bank's website. And that will stop the basic things, but it would stop so much fraud and so much misery in this world caused by people who use these techniques to take the money off people who've earned it, to take away people's peace of mind. And that's really my whole job. And that's really why I didn't, despite breaking into buildings from the age of 7, it's why I'm not a criminal. It's why, hopefully, I'm still on the side of the angels.
That's a wonderful point to conclude. Now, people can find you at humanfactorsecurity.co.uk.
Sure. Or if you search for The People Hacker, you'll find me as well. I'm quite, funnily enough, I'm quite easy to find. So I've got YouTube's, we've got YouTube, Human Factor Security, and all over Twitter. So yeah, I'm easy enough to find, Eric. Thank you.
Well, hey, thank you so much for coming on.
No, I enjoyed it. Thank you for asking me.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you heard, please consider subscribing for free. And I mean for free. It is always free. There's no billing, anything else. You can subscribe in your player of choice, which is probably right in your hands, or you can go to unstructuredpod.com, and there are plenty of links there. Thank you so much. And in the spirit of sharing, here's a couple more shows you may want to check out.
Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, the host of It's No Secret with Dr. T, which is a small business and marketing podcast. Each week, I interview business leaders who openly share the secrets to the massive success. It's No Secret with Dr. T will educate, entertain, and inspire you. Check it out. You'll find it wherever you listen to podcasts, or you can go to my website, tysonfranklin.com.
I did not grow up with very much money.
Money's energy.
Money is something that really scares me. You had about 60 grand in debt.
Money isn't the answer.
Somebody should just give me a lot of money.
My dream was to be the WWE wrestler, but you realize that your dreams change over the years.
Money is a tool. It's a key to a gate. And at the other side of the gate is the things that you really want to do with your life. It's the things that matter most to you. It's pursuing those values that make you ultimately happy.
Listen to Inspired Money at inspiredmoney.fm.